We've all been taught pretty much from day one that U.S. citizenship sits at the very top of the food chain, right? Like, especially regarding freedom.
Oh, absolutely. You hold that navy blue passport, and you just assume you inherently have the right to go anywhere.
Yeah, to just do anything, live life completely on your own terms. But, well, if you actually look at the legal architecture holding that citizenship together, a totally different, honestly, kind of unsettling picture starts to emerge.
It really does. It completely flips the narrative upside down. The source material we're looking at today points to this phenomenon that tax and citizenship expert John Richardson actually coined. He says it Fortress America.
Fortress America.
Yeah, and the defining feature of a fortress isn't just that it keeps enemies out, it's that it is specifically designed to keep its own people inside.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're going to figure out what Fortress America actually is, because it turns out the walls of this country aren't made of brick or, barbed wire.
Right, they're made of friction.
Exactly, this invisible, highly complex web of legal friction. We're going to look at the rights you actually have on paper versus what you think you have.
Which is a big gap.
A huge gap. And we'll explore how bureaucratic complexity acts as a control mechanism, and finally, what a proposed mobility amendment to the Constitution might actually look like.
And this matters directly to you listening, whether you travel internationally for work, whether you're an immigrant, an expat, or honestly, even if you are someone who has never left your home state.
Yeah, you still need to know this stuff.
Because understanding the invisible tethers of your citizenship is crucial. You can't fully grasp your day-to-day freedoms unless you understand the legal walls built around them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at those walls. Because for me, the most shocking realization here is the breakdown of constitutional mobility rights. Most of us just assume we have a fundamental constitutional right to leave the country.
Right, but we don't.
We don't. The U.S. Constitution does not explicitly grant citizens the right to exit.
There is a massive presumption against the freedom of the individual here. Not only is the right to leave absent from the Constitution, but under a federal statute, specifically 8 U.S.C. 1185, it is actually illegal for a citizen to depart or enter the United States without a valid passport.
Wait, illegal? Like, you legally have to have the government-issued document to leave?
Yes, but you'd think as a citizen you at least have an absolute right to that document, right?
You would definitely think that.
Well, the Supreme Court says otherwise. In a 1981 case called Hague v. IG, the court basically established that citizens are not inherently entitled to a passport.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, issuing his passport is completely discretionary. The government requires you to have a document to legally leave the physical borders of the country, but they reserve the legal right to simply refuse to give it to you.
It sounds like the ultimate trap, like an inescapable gym membership.
A gym membership.
Yeah, imagine you're physically inside the gym, and you're legally required to swipe a specific key card to unlock the front doors to leave, but the management can legally refuse to give you the key card, and you're just stuck by the treadmills indefinitely.
That is a remarkably accurate analogy. You are bound by the rules of the building, but you have no guaranteed mechanism to exit. And it gets worse, because the restrictions don't just apply to you physically leaving.
Right.
They also restrict who you can bring into the fortress with you. Look at this very recent 2024 Supreme Court case, Department of State v. Munoz.
Oh, this one blew my mind. What actually happened in the Munoz case?
So it centers on a legal mechanism called consular non-reviewability.
Okay.
Basically, if a U.S. citizen marries a foreigner and a U.S. consular officer stationed overseas denies that foreign spouse a visa to come to the United States, that decision is final.
Wait, final.
Yeah.
So a single bureaucrat overseas can just say no, and as a U.S. citizen, you have no right to appeal to a judge.
Correct. Under consular non-reviewability, U.S. courts have absolutely no power to review or overturn the consular officer's decision.
That is wild.
The court ruled that a U.S. citizen has no constitutionally protected liberty interest in bringing a non-citizen spouse to live with them in the U.S. So you don't have a guaranteed right to leave, and you don't have a guaranteed right to build your family inside the country if you marry a foreigner.
Which really highlights how, frankly, out of step the U.S. Constitution is with the modern world. I mean, if you look at modern constitutions, like Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Mobility rights are explicitly enumerated.
Yes, right there in the text.
A Canadian citizen has a constitutional right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. In America, your ability to move relies on a system where those rights are incredibly precarious.
Exactly. But, okay, let's say you do manage to get the passport. You swipe the gym key card, you leave the building, and you move abroad. This is where the physical fortress transforms into a financial fortress.
Because leaving the physical borders of the U.S. does not mean you leave the tax system.
Not at all. Almost every other country on Earth uses a residency-based taxation system.
Right, like if you live in France, you pay taxes to France.
Exactly. If a French citizen moves to Japan, they pay Japanese taxes, not French taxes. But the United States uses citizenship-based taxation. The U.S. taxes its citizens on their worldwide income, no matter where they live, work, or earn that money.
Okay, but I have to ask the obvious question here, sort of play devil's advocate. Isn't this just to catch wealthy tax evaders? Like billionaires hiding money offshore? Why does this matter to the average person who just wants to live and work in, say, London or Tokyo?
That is exactly the intent behind the laws, sure. But the actual mechanics of how these laws work end up hitting the average person the hardest. Take FACE, for example.
The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act.
Right. This law essentially forces every foreign bank in the world to report the financial activities of their U.S. citizen clients directly to the IRS.
So if I move to London and I just open a standard checking account to pay my rent and buy groceries, the U.S. government is monitoring that.
Yes, they are. And because the compliance costs for foreign banks are so astronomically high and the penalties for messing up are so severe, many foreign banks just flat out refuse to open accounts for Americans.
Oh, wow.
You have average middle-class expats who cannot get a basic checking account or a mortgage in the country where they legally live simply because they hold a U.S. passport.
That is, you become a toxic asset to a bank just by being an American.
You really do. And then there's the FBAR, the Report of Foreign Bank and Financial Accounts.
Right? I've heard of this one.
If the aggregate value of all your foreign accounts exceeds $10,000 at any point in the calendar year, you have to report it to the U.S. government.
And we aren't talking about tax evasion here.
No, this is purely an information return. But if you make a mistake, or you just didn't know you had to file it, the penalties are absolutely draconian. We're talking thousands of dollars per violation. It can sometimes wipe out half of an account's value over totally innocent mistakes.
I mean, picture yourself sitting at your kitchen table. You're an American living overseas, and you're staring at this mountain of tax forms. You aren't wealthy. You're just trying to comply. But a single misplaced check mark could literally bankrupt you.
Which brings up a brilliant concept from the source material: the tyranny of complexity.
The tyranny of complexity. I like that phrase.
It's so accurate. Think about standard tax instructions, like the US 1040 form. Those instructions are written at a 14th grade reading level.
So essentially requiring college-level comprehension.
Exactly. But the average reading level is 7th grade. When the rules governing your finances and your freedom are literally incomprehensible to the average citizen, compliance becomes impossible unless you can afford to hire expensive specialized accountants and lawyers.
Right. The billionaire can afford the team of lawyers to navigate the maze. But the average pensioner living abroad is paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. It really echoes that historical theory by Charles Adams.
Oh, about the decline of civilizations.
Yeah. He argued that you can trace the decline of civilizations directly to excessive, incomprehensible taxation. When the law is so complex that you can't even tell if you are breaking it, you are effectively living under a form of tyranny.
And that tyranny of complexity reaches its absolute peak if you decide you've had enough.
What do you mean?
Let's say you want to completely sever your ties and renounce your U.S. citizenship. You don't just hand in your passport. You have to navigate the exit tax.
Under Internal Revenue Code 877A, how exactly does this exit tax work? Because it sounds terrifying.
The mechanism is brutal. The government basically looks at all of your assets globally, your house, your savings, your retirement accounts, and they treat it as if you sold absolutely everything you own the day before you renounce your citizenship.
Wait, sold it, even if you haven't sold anything?
Exactly. It's a tax on unrealized capital gains. You haven't seen a dime of actual profit, but you are taxed as if you cashed out your entire life.
That is unbelievable.
And this creates a massive phenomenon of pension prisoners. Imagine you are a green card holder or an expat who has worked decades and built up a $2 million pension or 401k. If you try to expatriate, you trigger what's called covered expatriate status.
Because your net worth is over the threshold.
Right. And hitting that status triggers immediate, severe financial penalties on your retirement accounts. It can even permanently ruin your ability to leave an inheritance to your U.S. citizen children.
Wow.
The United States is uniquely alone in the developed world in doing this. It takes everyday life events, saving for retirement, passing down money to your kids, and turns them into massive financial bear traps designed to punish you for trying to leave.
So the physical walls stop you from leaving without permission, and the financial walls bankrupt you if you try to cut the cord.
Exactly.
But what really struck me in the source material is that this bureaucratic complexity isn't just used to keep people in, it's also being weaponized against people who are already here, specifically naturalized citizens.
Yes. This is where we get into denaturalization. Now, looking at the source discussion, under the Trump administration, there was a stated policy shift to heavily expand efforts to strip people of their naturalized citizenship.
And just to be clear to the listener, we are strictly remaining impartial here and just reporting what the sources outlined about this policy.
Right, absolutely. The sources detail how dedicated task forces were created to look backward through decades of immigration files, actively searching for what the law calls material misrepresentations.
Which sounds like a fancy legal term for a lie, but how does that actually work in practice?
Well, you have to look at the timeline of a naturalized citizen. It is an incredibly long alphabet soup journey of paperwork.
Lots of acronyms.
Tons. Someone might originally enter the U.S. on a tourist visa, which is a DS-160 form. A few years later, maybe they come back on an H-1B work visa. Eventually, they marry or get sponsored, and they apply for a green card using an I-485 form.
Yeah.
Then years after that, they file the N-400 to finally become a citizen.
That spans potentially 20 years of bureaucratic filings.
Exactly. And remember that tyranny of complexity we talked about. These forms are incredibly dense, poorly worded, and just confusing. What these task forces do is compare the answers on your green card application from, say, 2015 against the answers you put on a tourist visa back in 2005.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If they find a minor inconsistency, maybe you've got the exact date of a previous job wrong, or you misunderstood a vague question about past affiliations, that inconsistency is flagged as a material misrepresentation.
So they label an innocent typo as fraud.
Yes. And if the original visa was supposedly obtained through fraud, then the green card is invalid, which makes the citizenship invalid.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. And again, just pushing back a bit. If someone actually lied to get into the country or secure citizenship, shouldn't they be penalized? Like, isn't revoking it just the normal consequence of fraud?
The source experts offer a strong counter-argument to that. They argue it's really about government leverage, not catching master criminals. Of course, heinous people exist who abuse the system. But when you lack clear, simple, bright-line rules, the government can use minor administrative errors to harass the average person to meet quotas.
Right.
If the Department of Justice files a civil denaturalization complaint against you, you have to defend yourself in federal district court.
And what does that actually cost an individual?
Hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees.
Oh my God.
The average naturalized citizen simply does not have the money or the legal comprehension to fight a massive federal lawsuit over a 10-year-old clerical error, so they lose by default.
Which perfectly illustrates a quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson in our research. When people fear the government, there is tyranny.
Exactly. When the rules are so vague and complex that anyone can be found technically guilty of something, the government holds absolute power over your status.
So we have a system where your right to leave is discretionary, your global bank accounts are monitored and taxed, your retirement is held hostage by exit taxes, and your naturalized citizenship can be revoked over a typo. It sounds incredibly bleak.
It does.
But there is a solution being proposed in the sources to cut through all of this.
Yes, there is a push to fight the tyranny of complexity with the ultimate bright-line rule. The proposal is to pass a mobility amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
An actual amendment. What would the specific wording look like to dismantle Fortress America?
The core language discussed is simple but incredibly precise. It would guarantee the right of a U.S. citizen to enter, exit, stay, and relinquish U.S. citizenship without encumbrance. And it would explicitly include the right not to be denaturalized.
Without encumbrance, that phrase. It feels like those two words are the kill switch for everything we just talked about.
They absolutely are. That phrase is the legal mechanism to neutralize the friction. If the Constitution says you have the right to leave and renounce without encumbrance, then the government cannot legally impose a tax on your unrealized capital gains just because you are handing in your passport.
Right.
They cannot hold you in a holding tank at the border to interrogate you about your time abroad. It strips the government of the ability to use financial and bureaucratic friction as a cage.
But, I mean, amending the Constitution is practically a miracle in today's political climate. It requires a massive cultural movement.
It really
You look at
does.
the First or Second Amendments, the Second Amendment has an intensely passionate, almost rabid fan base. People have bumper stickers, T-shirts, and coffee mugs defending their right to bear arms. A mobility amendment would need that exact same level of cultural cachet and lobbying power.
Which requires a fundamental shift in how Americans view the very concept of citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stop viewing citizenship as this exclusive blood oath.
Like, how so?
Well, take a recent bill proposed by Bernie Moreno that aims to penalize or restrict dual citizenship, pushing for an exclusive U.S. citizenship model.
And again, we're staying politically neutral here, just looking at the legal mechanisms. But the idea is, if you swear loyalty to the U.S., you shouldn't be allowed to hold a passport from Italy or Canada.
That's the idea behind it. But the source points out the absurdity of this by highlighting a vital legal reality in international law called citizenship by operation of law.
How does that work?
Every sovereign nation gets to decide its own rules for who is a citizen. A foreign country could theoretically pass a law tomorrow declaring that anyone with a grandfather born in their territory is automatically a citizen of their nation. You wouldn't have to apply for it. You wouldn't even have to know about it. It just happens automatically by operation of their law.
So I could be sitting in my living room doing absolutely nothing, and suddenly I'm legally a dual citizen of another country without my consent.
Precisely. Now imagine if the U.S. had a strict law stating that holding dual citizenship revokes your American standing. A foreign government could literally threaten your U.S. rights just by passing a law in their own parliament.
Wow.
It highlights the absurdity of trying to legally isolate citizens in a globally connected world. The U.S. cannot dictate the sovereign laws of other nations.
There's an incredible historical contrast brought up in the discussion that really captures how much the narrative has shifted on this. In 1961, John F. Kennedy gave a famous speech at the Berlin Wall.
Right, the Berlin Wall speech.
And he proudly stated that a democracy might have its flaws, but we've never had to put up a wall to keep our people in.
But fast forward exactly 50 years.
Yeah.
In 2011 presidential debate, Ron Paul warned the audience that the border fences being proposed to keep people out could one day very easily be flipped to keep Americans in.
Wow.
And he specifically tied that physical lockdown to capital controls laws designed to lock down your money so you can't take it with you.
Which is exactly what FACA and the exit tax actually do.
Hmm.
So what does this all mean? Why do people accept these restrictions so easily? Why isn't there already a mass movement for a mobility amendment?
The underlying psychology is fascinating. The experts suggest people falsely equate citizenship with feudal loyalty or religious devotion. You constantly hear phrases like, no man can serve two masters, when people argue against dual citizenship.
They treat the government like a deity that requires absolute unquestioning devotion.
Exactly. But they synthesize it beautifully. Citizenship isn't a blood oath to a sovereign king. It is fundamentally just a temporal membership in a political community, a nation-state.
Right.
The purpose of that nation-state is to organize society and serve the people. It is not meant to act as a warden, trapping its members inside and punishing them if they decide they want to join a different community.
Wow. We have really covered a massive amount of ground today.
We definitely have.
We started by completely shattering the illusion that U.S. citizenship guarantees absolute freedom of movement, realizing that under cases like Hague v. Adja, there isn't even a constitutional right to leave.
Or a right to a passport.
Right. We broke down the mechanics of the financial fortress, how FATIA turns foreign banks against Americans, and how the exit tax taxes you on money you haven't even made just to punish you for leaving.
The pension prisoners.
Exactly. We explored how a maze of immigration forms is weaponized to threaten naturalized citizens over innocent typos. And finally, we looked at the vision of a mobility amendment, a true constitutional guarantee to move and relinquish citizenship without encumbrance.
It really forces you to re-examine what that passport in your drawer actually represents. Is it a key or is it a tether?
And to everyone listening, this is why understanding this legal architecture is so critical. Rights are entirely use it or lose it. Whether you are actively planning to move abroad or you just want the freedom to take a vacation, these invisible legal walls dictate your actual reality.
The friction itself is the fortress.
Yeah.
And as a final thought, building on what we've learned, we need to consider where all of this is heading. We've spent this deep dive talking about physical borders, paper passports, and tax forms. But think about the trajectory of technology.
Oh, that's true.
If governments can already monitor our global bank accounts in real time, if they can instantly revoke our digital passports, and if they can use algorithms to scour decades of our data to find a single typo to use against us, are we entering an era where the physical borders of a country no longer even matter?
Because the fortress just follows you wherever you go.
Exactly. The fortress isn't a wall made of brick anymore. It's actually carried inside our own pockets via our digital identities. The legal friction isn't just at an airport border crossing. It's permanently baked into our smartphones, our digital banking, and our permanent data trails.
That is definitely something to think about the next time you breeze through an airport scanner, swiping that invisible gym key card, and wondering who actually controls the locks on the doors. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.